Buenos nachos, amigos, and welcome to Record Breakers, a music podcast where a group of friends gather together to share music with each other, an album at a time. It's like a little book club for music. It's fun times had by all. I'm Petey Rave, and I don't want to go outside either. I'm gonna stay inside. I'm just gonna stay inside for good. And here with me. Not with me because we got to keep this social distancing thing, and that's it. That's our reference of it. I just said it. That's our one reference that every podcast has to do now. Boom, social distancing. Here with me virtually is my team, my squad, my crew. We've got David.
You're practicing social distancing, but are you still washing your hands for more than 20 seconds?
Yes. I just do. Everybody does songs. I just do 20 Mississippis, man. That's all you got. That's all you got to do. Everybody's trying to overthink it. We've got Matt.
Yeah, I'm not. If I washed my hands like 5 minutes ago, I might skimp a little bit, but no, I'm doing the full length.
Yeah, you can also do just 1,000. 1,000 to 1,000 if the thought of multiple Mississippis frightens you. Which it's
thought of one Mississippi is on the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And of course, last but not least, we got Brett.
You know, a lot of people they're fans of the Cyber Demon. Some people like the Keiko Demon, but the Incubus, he's the big fat demon with guns for hands. I'm ready to talk about some Doom enemies, everybody.
Yeah.
Rip and tear.
Yes, Mancubus, greatest hits.
That's certainly the game I've been playing.
No, that's a discussion for a different podcast. I've really been thinking about that a lot lately.
But yeah, that being said, we're here to talk about music, not Doom or Animal Crossing or Doomono Crossing. Whichever fan fiction you create. We're here to talk about music, and we're talking about an album, and the provider of the album is me. I brought forth for the crew a band that was big in the late 90s, but an album that was released in the early to close to mid 2000s. We're going to talk about Incubus and their album from 2004, A Crow Left of the Murder, ... This is a really interesting album. It's an album that this is like, in my mind, this is, of course, like I said last last episode, this is late Incubus. Like, obviously the stuff that kind of broke them was their main career, and this was like the late stuff. But this happened, released quite a few years ago, 16 years ago at this point, and somehow it became irrelevant again. And we'll talk about that later. But let's talk about expectations. Let's go with David. David, what were your expectations coming into this album?
Well, now I'm expecting a story with that radio tease, Petey Rave. I will say that when I saw and started looking up this album, I started reading the reviews for it, and yeah, those were some reviews that were way off. I was aware of Incubus and their singles from the late 90s, and they were kind of in that group of rock bands from that era that I knew were popular, but they weren't exactly heavy enough for what I was looking for. I just remember them having a really, really good vocalist, most of all. So I will always give anything a chance. Let's just see what happens.
Yeah, let's just see what happens. Matt, what were your expectations coming into this album?
The name sounded vaguely familiar. That was about it. I was like, is that a metal band? I don't know. we'll find out. I generally like to go into albums with first listen having nothing but basically the album cover and maybe my music player of choice's genre.
What did this
Which-
album cover tell you? Like I'm looking. Let's all take a look at this 2004
much.
ass album cover. Like-
This one, not much. It fell in line with like, yeah, I can see this being a heavy metal band or like a hard rock band.
Look at the stoned looking
I'm-
guy on the
I'm
on the one
saying
end.
this-
That's got to be the drummer. You know?
This looks in no way heavy enough for me. This is alt rock, prime late 90s alt rock.
There's some. Are those roses and maybe poppies?
Mhm.
I mean,
Something like
it
that.
was the era of having a pill addiction.
Yep.
Mm.
Yep. But yeah, Brett, what were your expectations coming into this album?
I mean, okay, so 2004, probably not unlike Petey. I was a grown adult by then, and I remember this. This was what was going on. I honestly never gave Incubus any time of day. At the time that this came out, I was, I thought anything that was played on the radio, which this got a lot of radio play, anything that came on the radio was, trying to sell me, extreme motocross kid rock and like, a pill addiction. It was the
You
era.
weren't wrong. You weren't
Yeah,
wrong.
like I need sequins on my jeans, on my butt, telling you I need an affliction shirt, that
Yeah.
kind of
Needed-
stuff. And I was like more punk rock. I was like, give me the early 80s punk rock and some cheap beer. So like a lot of time has passed, like half of my life since this album. So I came into this being like, okay, I'm gonna have to give this a fair shake, even though I know a lot of the pieces. But actually, I ended up learning a lot more than I learned a lot.
Yes. Yeah, musically, it's interesting. Incubus is a known quantity for a lot of people, especially if you grew up the years that I and Brett and I think DJ as well grew up in. They were a name out there. They were late 90s. They were attached. They were new metal and new metal adjacent. They kind of like fluctuated. They did more ballady stuff than they weren't as heavy as some of the other new metal bands. But they were of that. They opened for a lot of those bands, and they had their own like hit singles that that kind of broke them out. They had an attractive lead singer. That looked like a male model. He was all the ladies loved Brandon and his abs and his shirtlessness. And they had imitators, like if you Hoobastank is the most prominent Incubus cover band, Incubus tribute band out there. If we were being really realistic, so if you've heard The Reason, you could hear somebody imitating Incubus's sound.
I think I was fully in my death metal phase at this point.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like none of us, I would, especially Matt, weren't in a place where we would be like, oh yeah, let's dig into this Incubus.
Yeah,
I'm trying to remember what I was listening to in 2004, and I want to say I was just discovering, like, I think I was going from Beatles to Jefferson Airplane and Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
I was injecting Genesis and King Crimson along with Morbid Angel just right into my neck. Just complete extremes of the universe.
So that's
probably closer to Beatles.
Yeah, but even more so the late 90s. I imagine
all of us here had fully eschewed mainstream radio.
Where
completely.
I was listening to some of this stuff. I was listening to a lot of things, but including some of the new metal stuff. So I was aware of Incubus musically, and I enjoyed some of the songs. But going into this album, they did kind of change things up. They kind of had everything was a little bit more just regular alternative rock, with a new metal feel, but very centered around the vocals and things like that. But going into this album was a kind of a change of style. Brandon got a little bit more angry lyrically. Some might say attribute it to the fact that from the album Morning View to the album A Crow Left of the Murder, we got, let's say, about 2 years of the George W. Bush presidency. So there's quite a bit of a change in mood because of that, as far as, lyrically, thematically, and things like that. Also, this album kind of brings in, and as if you look at like reviews and people point out, brings in a little bit more of Mike Einziger as a guitarist and more of his work, and bringing him a little bit more of a prominence, where they're incorporating a little bit more of different styles. I like that on the Wikipedia article they say they incorporate art rock, alternative metal, jazz, and stuff like that. But like little touches here and there from Mike Einziger being kind of like a really cool guitarist and bringing in some of his influences. And I think musically it is a little bit of a nice departure, and it's a cool album to listen to, and it sets a cool mood. And I think it works well musically. Like the singles are really cool, but I think some of the other like album cuts are bringing nice like feel and sound to them. The guitar work is fantastic. You do the turntablist stuff. Yeah, Incubus was one of those bands that had a turntablist. If you want to know where they were in the late 90s, DJ. I forget. DJ Kilmore isn't as prominent here, but he has his touches. The bass isn't as prominent as it was before because they had a change of bassist. So it's more guitar, more vocals than anything, which creates a different sound and a cool sound that I think works really well. I mean, that's as best that I can like word it. But let's go to you guys for how this is musically. David, how would you describe this album musically?
At the beginning of the show, I mentioned how when I was looking up and researching this album, I read some of the reviews that were written. And as Petey mentioned, art rock and jazz were brought up. I'm going to disagree. And I'm going to be as respectful as I can with that. I'm going to respectfully disagree. I think that if you think that maybe Pearl Jam goes a little wild with guitar pyrotechnics, this might be considered art rock or jazzy to you. But this is still solid songwriting with a melodic bend, but at its core, still kind of art rock from the 90s.
So late of 90s, it's 2004.
Yeah.
I'll get into that a little bit here in a minute.
Again, Brett, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
Matt, how would you describe this album musically?
It was one of those things that came upon me gradually. There were a lot of riffs that involved open strings and then moving around a high string at about an octave plus a third, the music nerds, and just kind of going around there. But they really liked that octave plus a third interval, which, to be fair, I do too. But it's like, man, that's another song that's using. Is that the same riff? No, it's different. It just sounds exactly the same. That said, the harmonic structure, like the chords were the chord progressions, I did enjoy a fair amount of them. Some of them could get pretty repetitive. Like there was definitely one I'm like, is this the exact same chord progression as an earlier song? I don't know. But it to the point of influences from jazz, I mean, I did hear a couple of like augmented chords and a diminished chord, so maybe that's what they're talking about. But I'm not going to defend that.
Brett, how would you describe this album musically?
Lyrically, it's a very angry album, like you said. I also noticed that there wasn't as much bass going on as you would think. It was mixed very much like a 2004 album, but there are other things going on here that were interesting, like with the talking about the guitars. Like I'll just say that, like, yeah, this album had some interesting things. There's nowhere where you would be like, hey, they're taking the easy, they're not hitting the easy button like completely. They're at least playing a chord that you don't see on you won't see on a Disturbed album. But there was a lot of like extreme use of modulation. Like, this album will give you the ooh-woos. It's got phasers and flangers and like noise, and like they do it in weird ways sometimes to emulate other things like horns. I'll get into that when we break down the songs. But there were a few times that like I was listening and I heard things that reminded me of the 90s. There was like like the bendy rhythm, like a Soundgarden or Stone Temple Pilots song. They were doing some of those things that you don't hear much after that in a lot of writing. And there was still like that really saturated overdrive that you hear on like a Weezer album, or like the song 2 from Blur, that like super saturated overdrive that like it showed up in places where the rest of the song is swimmy, and it's swimmy in like different ways. Even when it's clean and dirty, it's like if you get your headphones on, there's some stereo effects, like some rotating speaker going on. It really is it's the ooh-woos. It's an opium den musically. But there are other things that were extremely there were songs that felt like they got together and were like, hey, do you want to write this song, but like in the middle of it we'll just like do an almost copy of The Middle of Limelight by Rush. or like let's do what would happen if we wrote like a James Bond theme song. Like there's some of that going on.
Yeah.
But I'll get into those when we get into the individual track. There's things that were done here that like I was not expecting from what I had heard over the air.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about some key tracks. I will say, you point out a couple of things. Obviously Megalomaniac starts things off. It is one of the singles off of the album, and like I said earlier, if this album does seem colored by the fact that it was in 2004 as opposed to the previous album being just at the end of 2001. Or actually recorded at the beginning of 2001, but released at the end. And it's this song, even though when it was released and the music video was released, the band insisted that it wasn't about any particular person. Most people realized that it was about what was going on at the time. The war in Iraq had just started, things that, a couple of years into George W. Bush's presidency.
We saw Janet Jackson's boobie.
Yeah, so there was a lot of emotion, but specifically, there's a lot of emotion, a lot of turmoil going on, and you see that in that song, and then the fact that 16 years later, we find ourselves once again going, "Hey, Megalomaniac, you're no Jesus, you're no fucking Elvis. Step down." Once again, is kind of fun.
Okay, I'll quit the podcast then. I'll leave. Right.
I mean, you are no Elvis.
But you can't just shake your hips.
Who is?
I would say. You've seen
not even Elvis.
No, not even Elvis. Moving on, the next track, "A Curler Left with a Murder," is also really cool because it's got some really cool guitar stuff in there, and it starts off some really creative stuff with the guitar work, and it's fun to listen to. Also, it has one of the few parts where DJ Kilmore makes his presence felt, where you kind of have this this ambient instrumental part, but like it's mostly just him kind of using the turntables to just play this ambient sound and play with it on his turntable, which is really cool. Also agoraphobia, because we're all staying inside. I don't know. Hopefully not for good. But yeah, you never know. And also Six Sad Little World, which is their like we're gonna have our own 6-minute opus, our own 6-minute epic. Watch us play our thing. But I think it works well. It carries it, and you kind of I didn't notice that it was any longer. I enjoyed it, and kind of like next thing I know, the next song was up. Yeah, those are some like key tracks, and there's a lot of really great moments in a lot of different songs. But I think those are the ones that I think stand out and want to zero in on. David, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Six Sad Little World is a song that goes into a great riff and vocal line. The emphasis on the vocals and the guitars on this song really are a positive, and this had a sense of urgency. The song had some real urgency and energy to it that didn't come up too frequently throughout this album, but this one had some real energy to it and some real power. Priceless was okay until I heard a complete audio atrocity. And that was the fact that the drum on this song, Priceless, is the only thing I've ever heard that compared to the Saint Anger snare drum. So that's like minus 50 points right there. Just moving on, it took me about 9 tracks to get to Z DeVille. And that was the one that I really, really enjoyed on this album, Z DeVille. And it took, maybe aside from Six Sad Little World, which I liked, but I really liked Z DeVille.
Mm-hmm. Matt, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
Southern Girl. It just had a nice groove to it, which I'm always a sucker for. I realized, I kind of looking at the lyrics, that most of the tracks that I gravitated towards musically did not maybe have the most inspired lyrics, in my opinion. The intro for Southern Girl is really interesting. I think there might be a sitar in there, and maybe I don't know. There's this thing called a marxophone, which is what they used in like the Doors' Alabama song, and it kind of sounds like a hammered dulcimer, but it's different. Wikipedia doesn't say anything about it on the marxophone page, although it does mention it in Leech apparently has a marxophone on it. But yeah, that was
yeah, I remember learning about the holophoner.
Holophoner. Yeah, it was a cool song though, and like I don't know, then the pitch started to move around, and I was like, is somebody playing that sitar with a slide? I don't know.
Is that allowed?
Yeah, I'm gonna Google something here in a bit. So.
I mean, if
it feels like a diplomacy violation.
I mean, whatever you do in the privacy of your own home is your own business. Made for TV movie. I just want. This was one of the songs that I just started thinking like, are they using the same chord progression in every song? Specifically, they were going from to the flat 3 chord a lot, and God, that was a little much. Like there are some tracks that kind of make me remember where I am in the album, and it's like, how much more do I have on this album? Okay. And I just more calling out lyrics. Smile lines, part of the chorus or pre-chorus or whatever, is, I understand why they say high school never ends. I don't know if I've ever heard anybody say that, so I don't know who they is.
Yeah.
But there's that.
Yeah.
Very
Lastly,
unhappy people.
Yeah.
apparently.
Let me tell you, everybody, high school ends.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Don't worry.
Yeah,
and
You'll
it's
get
good.
through it.
Yeah.
It ends.
Ends
And here
abruptly.
in my room, Yeah, Here in My Room is another one that like I gravitated towards musically. Like it had a really nice chord progression. It went to some like somewhat unexpected and just nice chords. Like it was just very well arranged, I thought. But again, I look at the lyrics and I'm like, well, you wrote something for it. I'm glad the music's good because those lyrics, by God, do they exist?
Yeah.
But do they? Do they?
I mean,
on something, on a piece of paper, maybe somewhere.
It's
a notebook.
debatable.
They
They
exist
were written.
They were written.
They were written.
Were they?
You know, that's the thing. There's a solution to bad lyrics. It's put a second guitar in and have them play the notes that the vocals would do, and
Yeah.
then don't have a vocalist.
Yeah.
But,
yeah,
you
no,
know.
you got a point.
Yeah. But
But-
that doesn't get played on the radio
That's right.
or get signed to a
This is-
label. It's a natural selection thing more than anything. Brett, what would be some of the key tracks for you?
No, I mean, I'm going to skip over a few that we've talked about, but I'm going to go straight to Pistola. Like at the 2-minute mark, they make a Rush song.
That
Like
means gun in Spanish.
yes, like the dun dun dun, you know, and like having it's like all of Rush's tropes. Like it's got like you've got the thing from Limelight where the guitar solo is like way loud and in your face, but there's way impressive bass going on behind. You can't hear it, but you know, like it's a lot of that. And also, you know, I didn't check to get the sheet music out to see is that 7/8 time, but that very much is a straight up Rush song. And they mic'd up hand claps, which you know, another one bites the dust is the only other use of quality hand clapping into a microphone that I can think of.
We reviewed Thriller.
Oh, sorry, I forgot a whole lot about how clapping hands can be used more than
was
just
on-
in rock radio.
That was on Thriller too.
Also, like
but-
the I don't think we're going to talk about light grenades, but I liked when I was reading the Wikipedia for their next album, Light Grenades. They talk about how in the song Paper Shoes they mic their bodies up with ambient mic and to just slap their chests and skulls just to make sounds.
Yeah, you know.
Is that called playing Hambone?
Yes,
I think it is.
That's what that is.
Another song that stood out is Here in My Room. It is written not unlike a movie theme. Like it's got the minor chord that's thrown in there. When you think it's gonna be when musically, actually I don't know exactly what they're doing there, but it kind of looks like they squeezed a Ben Folds bridge into a movie like theme. But you know, during the chorus, they brought out what I like to call the heartstring section. Like so, when you really need to pound it in, that we're bringing some depth to this in emotion.
Like when I would call all of those songs with punk songs at the end of romantic comedies. Is that what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm thinking the equivalent of singing Hallelujah. The muscle that uses in someone's brain. It's like it's not really a great song, but it's the music itself causes an emotional reaction in humans.
Tugging at a different heartstring than what I'm thinking.
Yes. And also they use effects to sound like a brass section swelling, which is also like a movie theme. But like using an effect to go, you know, like, you know, some bonkers. Like I wonder like how songwriting for this album went. Like I want to see those notes. Okay, I want to do this and make it into this, or I came up with these words and wrote this music around these words, because I don't think it went that way for most of these.
God, what if they did?
I don't know. Like that's what I want to know, because there's things going on here that are neat, that are like, wow, they did a thing. But also, I don't know. It seems very. I don't know. This left me with more questions than answers
Yes.
that I ever thought Incubus would give me.
Yes. Yeah. Let's talk about some conclusive thoughts. Bring it back around the horn. David, what would be your conclusion at the end of the day?
I will say at the end of the day, I wasn't exactly thrilled about this album overall. It took me a couple of listens to really power through to the last half of the album, which is a shame because it's where I really enjoyed most of it. It wasn't really, it didn't have enough of a punch in terms of a rock record for me. It didn't have anything really concussive or powerful. I do remember Brandon Boyd is his name, being a pretty good singer, but everything around him just kind of being dragged along. And that's kind of what this felt like. There were sparse moments here and there on this album that just didn't really seem to want to go as far as it should have. And I remember Incubus being a kind of band of this time period that was, I guess, just distorted enough to avoid the adult contemporary stations. But if you saw that they were on the lineup for Ozfest, you'd kind of laugh. And hey, remember Ozfest, everybody? And
remember Crazy Town at Ozfest?
Yeah, same thing. That didn't go well either. It really took me a while to get through this because a lot of it felt very half tempo. It just felt like a rock band that really wasn't willing to just go fully insane with what they were doing. And if that was meant for the sake of melodic songwriting, I can get that, but it just didn't come off the way it should. It came off like a group of guys that had been together for a while and wanted to try something different with their sound, but they just weren't quite there.
Matt, how would you conclude at the end of the day?
It was fine. I mean, I didn't hate it. There were certainly parts that I did enjoy, and there were certainly parts that kind of, they were the type of repetitive that made me think the whole album was repetitive. So I'd almost be curious to go back and just listen to the album without those songs and see how it strikes me. But I mean, the musically, I did enjoy it throughout. It had a nice kind of ebb and flow of, here's some harder songs. Now we're gonna back off. Now we'll get a little harder, back off a little more. But it was good. It was good.
It's good.
That's the Matt official review.
Stamp it on the box.
Yeah.
Brett, how would you conclude at the end of the day?
I mean, this is a time when it's hard to be a band that's like, hip hop influenced, new metal, and like 2004 comes along and you need to change. Like it's, 311 didn't decide that they were going to change how they sounded. So, some people could have just stuck with it. Hey, there are other bands that defy actual definitions. You don't know what is a 311. Like they played it on the same radio station.
I'm just trying to figure out why I've been hearing about 311 more than I would expect in the past 2 or 3 weeks.
Because it's become a thing to make fun of olds for. If they were really big into 311, I think it had to do with the 311 cruises that were going on.
Oh.
There's. Yeah, and 311. And if you've ever met, you weren't around for 311 fans when they were at their peak, but like
no.
But like, think of like your favorite Deadhead, but like put a goatee and like white dude dreads, some Chewbacca dreads going on, and
they're like 19,
and they got Jinkos on. Like it's just a fucking thing.
Okay, up until the Jinkos, you were just describing like a bunch of modern
and they're
Deadheads.
drinking like Fruitopia. It's great.
So that's like it jumped back. Like, It jumped back. It was the same archetype that just jumped back to being Deadheads.
Yeah, they took their 6-string bass guitars and went to Funktown. But this album, it's very of a time, but it was a time that I didn't participate in popular music. So like a lot of this stuff is like, oh, they're doing this, and oh, like they were still doing certain things at that time, where this album's old, like it's actual old, like it was a long time ago. This is like The Killers, yeah, they were new when this album came out, like that kind of stuff. It's like it's a very strange time to try and like go back and hold to today's standards, but like I'm probably not going to listen to a lot of this in the future. It's like not my thing. And some of the stuff that I remember hearing played over and over on the radio have become part of my, like, if you've got this in your recipe, I may or may not want to eat it kind of thing. So, maybe one fewer phase pedal, a little less warble.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, I picked this album mainly out of curiosity. I knew the singles, but I hadn't listened to the album before, like not as a full. And I mainly picked that as a curiosity. I enjoyed it. I think it's a good album. I think it's a good like piece of Incubus's history. If you like Incubus, not a lot of people are gonna be out there saying I like Incubus, and probably not even in this crowd. But that's fine. I think that this is a fun record. It is a fun to listen to record if you liked that sound, and if you liked where they progressed it to at this point. It's a nice mix of like feels. I think at the end of the day, it's a quality record by a band that might not and probably won't change your mind if you're not already into them. Or if you don't like them, like this is probably not gonna make an Incubus hater into a fan. Like, but
luckily we're at a point where it doesn't matter because they've already made their money, and whether you like it or not, like it does not. Nobody gets hurt by you not liking this.
Yeah,
but
so,
it was a very successful album. Like, this is
so it's worth taking a shot. It's worth taking a shot at. It's worth listening to, deciding on your own if you like it. And I enjoy it. I enjoyed it a lot. And now that brings us. Those are our thoughts on Incubus's "A Crow Left of the Murder." ... Now we get to the main event of the evening. We get to our haiku reviews. We get down to the nitty gritty. Haiku numero uno. David, what is your haiku?
90s alt rock band tries to stretch out their sound, but does it work? Not quite.
Matt, what is your haiku?
Repetitive riffs, occasional decent chords, not really my bag.
Brett, what is your haiku?
Giving a fair shake. Not what I thought it would be. It was worth my time.
And of course my haiku. Incubus mouth is dry. Incubus grows some by bringing in broader sounds. It's sure to intrigue. Those are our thoughts on Incubus's "A Crow Left of the Murder." ... You can of course find it on our Spotify playlist. Play Record Breakers the home game. Do your due diligence and your due diligence. Follow along at home. Do your homework, as it were. On that Spotify playlist would be next week's record, and it's going to be provided by David. David, what have you got for us next week?
I've got a bit of a conundrum, and this is one of those times where I would ask for assistance. So, Matt, I will ask you.
It's your fault now.
Oh, no.
I've been there.
Green or blue?
I'm wearing a green shirt, but I'm drinking from a blue cup.
Green or blue?
Blue.
Okay, very well. We will be reviewing the 2013 album from noted actor, musician, William Shatner.
Oh,
And
God.
the album is
Oh.
entitled Seeking Major Tom.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh no!
Well,
What
the other
have I
choice was going to
done?
be Leonard Nimoy's.
I look forward to that. This is going to be an interesting week next week. But that'll be next week. And this is this week. And you can, of course, find us all over the internet. David
Playing
is at
around. Think I'm playing around.
David is at Call Me DJM.
Christopher Lee's album.
Matt is at MRiddickW. Brett is at HibbityBibbert, HIBBI2YBIBBARD. I'm at PD Rave. The show's at 4 Record Breakers. That's the number 4 Record Breakers. RecordBreakersPodcast.com. RecordBreakersPodcast@gmail.com is the email. Rebelli.net for this and other shows. Rebelli TV on YouTube and elsewhere. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, all over the place. Like, share, subscribe, hit the bell, slap the walrus, spank the monkey, do all the things. Until next time,
Zip the weasel.
hasta los huevos.
Toodaloo.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.